Have you ever thought deeply about Apple products? Are you a lover, a hater, or something in between? Or do you not really care? Now, let's think about my age group, teenagers. If you've ever observed us, then you know that we primarily communicate through our devices. In this TED Talk, I asked you to consider the premise that the non-compatibility of some of Apple's most prominent features with Android devices makes non-Apple users, more specifically teenagers, feel excluded from some of the typical ways that we communicate. Teenagers are forced to think about these differences every time we buy a phone. We have to make a pivotal decision. Do I want an iPhone because that's the only way I can FaceTime, react to messages, and not get judged for some green text bubble? Or do I go the Android route but risk feeling like an outsider most of the time? Is that a fair choice? That's for you to decide. It helps to examine the stories of individuals when trying to see the effects this non-compatibility has on everyday life. To do so, let's look at my dad's first experience with Apple, back in the Stone Age. My dad came from an essentially all-Microsoft world when Apple came out. For my parents' 4th wedding anniversary, my mom bought him an iPod. However, just to get the iPod to work, he needed to buy a new MacBook computer, something he had never used before. In getting to know the MacBook, he figured out that some of his most useful and necessary business tools, like Microsoft Word, didn't easily transfer between his PC and his Mac. So now, he had a $1,400 laptop solely to operate his $100 iPod. 2 laptops, one for work and one for the single-function iPod. Now, you guys don't know my dad, but he isn't the most cheerful guy if he thinks he's being cheated. My dad called the idea that you needed to get a laptop to make an iPod work a sucker's game. As most of you probably know, Apple Incorporated was founded by 2 guys. The first, Steve Jobs, met his Apple co-founder, Steve Wozniak, while he was still in high school through a mutual friend. I like to call them Steve and Steve. Steve Inc., if you will. In 1974, Steve Jobs traveled to India with the goal of studying Zen Buddhism in order to become more enlightened. Jobs' Zen-inspired less is more aesthetic manifested itself in Apple computers, as they were presented as simple, beautiful, closed-system machines. Steve Jobs had this radical idea to create technology products that were both intuitive and accessible, something anybody could pick up and easily figure out how to use. To do so, Steve Jobs created his own Apple ecosystem of products, bearing Apple Peripherals. But what exactly is a peripheral? A peripheral is basically any type of device that works with and connects to a computer. Think of, for example, an image scanner, loudspeaker, microphone, or charging cord. Essentially, in the beginning, whoever wanted to buy an Apple product had to buy a new charging cord specifically for that device, an added expense. Apple peripherals were unique in that they were only accessible to those Apple products. The iceberg is slightly cracking now, as in some of Apple's more recent products, like its new MacBook Pro, there are charging ports that are compatible with other technology companies, like Microsoft or Samsung. This non-compatibility has clearly always had a positive effect on the profitability of Apple. However, I'd like to focus on maybe a different aspect of Apple's isolation from other technology companies. Let's go to the example of you, an Apple user trying to FaceTime your friend with an Android. There are now links so that non-Apple users can access the FaceTime feature. However, the link has to come from an Apple user. The Android user can't FaceTime whoever they want, and if they wanted to, they can only send that link to another person and create a group FaceTime. This is highly inefficient, as with an iPhone, all you have to do is open up the FaceTime feature, press a button, and you can call whoever you please. Are we lazy? I mean, maybe, but if we're being honest, you wouldn't like having to spend 20 minutes fiddling around on your phone every time you wanted to call a friend either. When I was getting a new phone last year, I wanted to buy a Samsung. I thought that it had a lot of different features that I personally liked. However, I felt that Features like AirDrop and FaceTime had become such integral and necessary parts of my social life that if I didn't get an iPhone, I'd be sacrificing a part of my social life that I just wasn't comfortable with. Teenagers can also sometimes frown upon non-Apple users. In the popular new game, New Phone Who Dis, there's even a response card that says, "Ew, you have an Android?" in the green text bubble. How's that for marketing? Elitist and exclusionary, or brilliant? Human nature drives people to want to be in communities, to be included in groups. Basically, the entire adolescent experience is trying to figure out who you are and where you fit in. Middle and high school friend groups are a perfect example of this. Now, because of this sort of Apple ecosystem that's been created, teenagers may feel left out of the Apple clique if they don't have an Apple product. It's not too far-fetched to say that a teenager's social experience is a function of the friends and groups to which they belong. Teenagers want to fit in, and Apple has done their very best to make having an iPhone, and with it, its functionality, part of fitting in. And this isn't the only example of separation between iPhones and non-Apple phones. For example, why is it that when you receive a text from a non-Apple phone, your text messages show up in this bright, glaring neon green color? While when you get a text message from an iPhone, it shows up in a much clearer, more recognizable blue bubble. What purpose does this serve? A subliminal way to show you who's in the group and who isn't? I mean, being a teenager is hard enough, but now it feels as though even my phone is judging where I stand in the group. And how about the revolutionary AirDrop function that doesn't even use your Wi-Fi or cellular data to transfer photos and videos in seconds? It's exquisite. You go out one night with your friends, take tons of photos, and all you have to do to share them is select the photos you want and the people who want them, and voila, everyone has the photos. Well, actually, not everybody. Your one Android user friend can't save those memories. Why? Because AirDrop is only accessible to Apple products. You could try texting those photos to that user, only to wait 10 minutes for them all to load on your 2 bars of cellular. Or you could say to that friend, "Yeah, I'll do that later," only to forget about it 2 minutes later. I mean, what kid is going to want to spend more than 60 seconds on their phone when they're trying to spend time with their friends? So where does that leave us? Apple users are content with their night excursion and photo evidence to prove it, while the Android users are left feeling victimized to the software engineers at Apple who couldn't cut them a break. So which one would you choose? Apple or non-Apple? And for all of you economics lovers out there, remember the tying in doctrine, where the purchase of one product is conditioned upon the purchase of another? How does it seem fair for Apple to make you buy the necessary charging block required to use the cord they give you, rather than to just give it to you like they have in the past? Apple may call it sustainability, but that's only assuming that the person buying the Apple product is a previous Apple customer. You can buy the product, but you'll never get to use it unless you buy the necessary wall attachment that goes with it. Now, think about the stylish new Apple Watch. Have you ever tried to set it up with something other than an iPhone, like an iPad, Android, or MacBook? Well, for those of you who haven't, you can't. In the initial setup of the Apple Watch, you can only pair it to an iPhone. But let's get back to the real point. Teenagers want to fit in and be able to communicate easily with their peers. To do so, a lot of teenagers use Apple features constantly. Well, that is unless they don't have an Apple product, so they don't have access to those tools. Apple doesn't seem to want to change this dynamic. If Americans, like in a lot of other countries, started to use apps like WhatsApp and their FaceTime equivalent, Apple may be more prone to change this. Until recently, the price differential between Apple and non-Apple phones was extremely high. In 2015, Apple phones cost an average of 2.7 times more than any other phone. I don't know where it was. This price difference has really created a very big barrier to owning an iPhone. So that was a big discrimination in who could buy Apple products and who couldn't. In recent years, other phone companies have had to raise their prices to compete with Apple's, but for a long time, it was a real barrier. Consider just how much you see Apple products in your everyday life. Apple Watches have replaced the original wristwatch, everyone's wearing AirPods all the time, and iPads have replaced paper for note-taking and drawing. Whether you like it or not, Apple is everywhere. Look, even if Steve and Steve didn't intend for this to happen, and even if the teenagers who use Apple products don't plan for this to be the effect, it's become the reality. The next time you pick up your phone, I want you to ask yourself, why did I pick this one? I think the answer will tie right back into our teenage desire to want to be part of a larger social framework and to have access to the tools that allow for that possibility. Maybe your phone choice is a small-scale problem, but the tactics that Apple uses could be emulated by others to create larger and more harmful problems. It's worth more than a minute of your time to consider this possibly grander issue. Look, Apple is a great company, and a lot of us use and love their products. But should we have to use their products in order to successfully navigate teen life? How do you feel about this? Do you feel manipulated? Do you feel that Apple is using their marketing power to the detriment of those who don't want or can't afford an iPhone? Is it right? Is it fair? Who wins in this situation? Is separating kids based on what phone they have the hot new marketing stance? And if so, what does that mean for the future? It scares me, and that's why I'm talking about it today. I want you to question these large companies, which make small decisions that have outsized impacts on our everyday lives without us even knowing it. And so, Apple, friend or fiend? Thank you guys for listening.